Okay. And that is why every center has lecturer anything all this one doesn't cost. This is the lecture. All he has to do is say for every center student, about the education and all the people like ability student. So it's something is just here and we are going to whatever visit here and have nothing. So yeah. Oh, let me disappear here. You're just see. This data is not on. Asking okay. So, good morning, everyone. How do I move to the next page? Of course. Okay. So, good morning. Good morning, everyone. You are welcome to today's class. Today, I want to sincerely apologize for last week not being able to make the class. It was due to an urgent thing that I did not plan for. But thank God, I sent the materials ahead earlier, and by now, I believe that everybody have the materials. But we will try as much as possible, believing that you must have gone through the materials, so we'll speed up today so that we are able to complete what we need to complete, even between last week and today. If there are questions, you can type your question as we move forward. You can ask your questions and we'll be able to respond to your questions. So today, we are treating conceptual skills building and conceptual framework. Two things together, conceptual skills building and conceptual framework. If looking at this, what are concepts? That is then conceptual skill building. We can start by looking at the word concept. So, and what this title is just talking about is how do we build our skills in handling concepts in research, whether social research, whether we are doing it in the laboratory or wherever we are doing research. You agree with me that we all use concepts. Concepts are basic to all research. And so how do we build our skills in the concept that we want to use? That is what we want to consider. But before we go into that, let me quickly discuss the research process with you. Here you will see that we have three phases for research process, according to Bataker, 2014. We have the exploration stage of research. That is where you are asking research, you are raising research questions. That is where you are going through literature to understand in depth what is it that you are about to do and how you can carry it out. Then the theory, where you are theorizing, you are looking at the mental image of how things are related. It is actually at this exploration stage where we need to have our conceptual skills building skill, our concepts well developed. This is where the skill is very, very paramount, because
Once you miss it at this stage, then it will affect the entire research process. And therefore, you may be interested in measuring B and you are actually measuring A when you are not very sure and when you are not very skillful in handling your concept. So we are going to go into that, into the detail, but it is this at this stage of exploration, although you still need that conceptual skill building all through the research process, even at the stage of research design and at the stage of research execution. But the first stage where this skill is really needed is this exploration stage. And once you man your concept properly at this stage, then the issue of designing and measurement and execution will become easy subsequently. If you don't understand this, your concept very well, and you don't delineate the boundaries, even when you go for laboratory experiment, you will be measuring something different from what you ought to measure. And that is why this topic is very, very paramount, and it's cut across research process from the beginning to the end. The second stage is research design, where you are operationalizing. You know, by the time you are not very sure of your concept, there is no way you can operationalize to understand. Then in your method, the sampling strategy. That is what is at the stage of design. And the last stage, which is research execution, that is where you have, between these stages, you have your research proposal. And at the stage of execution, you have your pilot testing, your data collection, data analysis, then you produce your report later. So that's okay. Now, coming back to concepts. There are two words that people often confuse, and that is the word concept and construct. They are very interrelated, and sometimes people use them for one another. But when we are doing research, we should have a clear understanding. Construct are abstract representation that can help us to understand and interpret complex data or phenomena. But when you talk of concepts, they are mental representation, and they help us to organize beyond just understanding and interpreting complex data. Concepts will help us to organize and make sense of the world. So concept will help us to relate abstract idea to practical issues that we are dealing with. So that's the major differences between the two. Having said that, I sent this book to you, the soft copy. Please try to read chapter 3 and chapter 6 of that book. It will help you a lot, and it will clear a lot of doubts about concept and construct. Then, having said that, all researchers make use of concepts. There is no research that does not make use of concepts. Whether you are doing it in physics, you are doing it in chemistry, you are doing it in Yoruba, you are doing it in law, you are doing it in social science, maybe sociology, anthropology, economics, and so on. We all make use of concepts. And unfortunately, many researchers, especially at the level of postgraduates, they make wrong use of concepts a lot of time. What then are concepts? In the context of this course, concepts are referred to as building blocks scattered all over that needs to be joined together to make a structure. That is theory. Okay, let me use this example. If we want to build a house, to construct a house, you need a lot of things to be put together. You need blocks, you need cement and sand that you will use to join it together. At some point, you need gravel. At some other point, you need iron. It is when you put all these things together that they become a whole house. And so, in our mental image, let us see theory as a whole house. Then concept will refer to those the blocks, the cements and sand, the iron, the whatever that you put together to make the house. So to make the theory. So concept, they are those building blocks that are scattered all over that needs to be joined together to make a structure, which is theory. And let me come in clear terms. They are words or phrases that connote certain meaning in a research. Words and phrases that connote certain meaning. And from this, we need to understand that the same word can have different meaning depending on the context, depending on the situation. And that is why you need to understand what does this concept mean in this work. So the meaning of a concept can vary depending on the context of its use. That's just what I've said. So meaning of a concept can vary. The same words you use in this study, when you are using it in another study, it could mean another thing. And we should have our consciousness about that, so that we don't just take the word for granted, those concepts for granted. And by the time we take them for granted, we can make errors in measurement. And once we make errors in measurement, then our output, that is the report, will be faulty and it will not be speaking to reality. So it is therefore very important that the meaning of a concept in a research needs to be understood to avoid wrong usage. Thus, there are two basic questions that we should ask when we want to build our conceptual skills. Two basic questions. One, what do the main concept mean in this study? The concepts that we are using in this study, what do they really mean? And the second question is, how are the main concepts measured? You know, and that is why even by the time you are reading literature, you must also understand the concept, the way it is being measured by different authors. The way it is being measured by A, B, and D, is it really the way I intend to measure it in this study? If they are not, it means that those works might not be speaking to your study. And therefore, you need to understand that properly. Once you understand that, then you will be able to apply it as appropriate. When we need to conceptualize, when do we need to conceptualize? When we are defining. So when we need to define definitions, what is the meaning of the word or term or idea is very important. So don't take it for granted. I'm going to throw out an example as I proceed in this lecture. So what is the actual use of the word? I mean, in which way have authors used it, and how do I want to use it? Then what are the boundaries within which a term operates? This term, this concept, what are the boundaries? So, and what are the contrary examples of the word? So if we have our understanding of all this, then it will become easier for us as we go ahead, as we try to measure, and as we navigate through the journey of our own research. Concepts, what do they even help us to achieve in any study? They enable interpretation of a subject. We are able to understand and have accurate interpretation of the phenomenon we are investigating. They analyze complex subject matter, and then they help synthesize separate pieces of a subject matter into a unit. Just like I told you the other time, that if you want to pull a house down, you can separate the brick, separate the iron, and so on. Then you understand the pieces of the subject matter. So when you understand your concepts in a study, then it will also help you to analyze that subject matter you are investigating, and also help you to synthesize these separate pieces, all these different concepts, the way they are related, the way they influence one another, or the way they contribute to one another. Then perceive similarities and differences. We are also able to understand this, what other concepts are similar to it, what are the differences, and so on. Then they enable us to make value judgment and extend our knowledge in a study. Okay. Now, speaking about conceptual skill building, what is it about? Conceptual skills building. Conceptual skills are the ability that allow an individual to better understand complex scenarios and develop creative solutions. So, anybody that possesses this skill, we have the ability to understand complex scenarios, complex issues, and also will be able to develop creative solutions to those issues. A concept is an abstraction, just as we said, which pulls together a number of facts. We are able to identify, we are able to label, we are able to classify, and relate phenomena to construct system of ideas. So when we have our conceptual skills very sharp, and these can help us to apply it to new situations. We can use these to solve, to raise questions and solve a lot of problems. So, thus, in conceptual skill building, researchers must have a very clear understanding of the key concepts, their diverse use in the discipline, and the specific use in the current study. Diverse use and the specific use in the current study. So let me throw this to the audience. For instance, the concept of stress. Stress we can use the word stress as a concept in social sciences. Stress, even in physical sciences, you can talk of stress even when you are looking at a building. You want to see the stress level for whatever. But the word stress can relate to psychological exertion. That is somebody being pressed, having a lot of pressure. It can also be related to physical exertion. Maybe going through a lot of physical exercises, a lot of assignments to do, a lot of things to carry out at the same time. That is physical exertion. And this stress can also be used for both psychological and physical exertion. So, if we are carrying out a study, we need to understand how are we measuring the concept stress in the particular study. So, if, for instance, we don't have a clear understanding of this concept, then it can affect the way we measure the variable stress. Let's see. The way the concept is defined will also influence the way it is measured. In a study of stress in students during a university semester, we can define stress in terms of: one, is it the distance of one lecture room to the other, size of room for students, and available seats, gaps between one lecture to the other. That is, when they finish one lecture in, I just said, where is the next venue for the next class? Is it science lecture theater B? You can imagine the distance from one lecture room to the other. And the number of seats, maybe some of them have to stand because there is no available seat. Maybe need to just bend on something to write because there is no available space. The size of the room, how comfortable is it? Maybe during the lecture, there are a lot of heat because the population, the room is overpopulated, and so on. These are related to physical stress. Physical stress. Is that what we want to measure when we have this study on stress in students during a university semester? So we want to measure stress. So the question is, how do we measure this stress? So are we interested in only physical stress that students go through when they have lectures? Or are we talking about even the psychological stress? Number of assignments given. And times they were supposed to submit those assignments. The thought of impromptu tests. Or are we instead interested in one? If we are interested in both, then we should define our stress as such. So we are building our skill. We are trying to understand our concept. So it means that by the time we want to measure stress, especially in our instrument, by the time we are developing instrument, we want to measure stress. Our instrument should capture both the physical and the psychological. But if we are only interested in physical, then our instrument need not to deal with psychological stress. If we are interested in psychological stress, then our instrument need not to deal with physical stress. But we must have this clear understanding so that we will be able to measure what we need to measure. But you can imagine, if stress, as is being mentioned in this study, if the interest is meant to be psychological stress and all what you are measuring is physical stress, you will discover that at the end of the day, when you produce your result, the result will not be useful because it will not produce the desired result. And that is why we must understand our concepts and build our skills as such on the appropriate concept. I don't know whether, I'm sorry, can they speak? Can you hear them? Okay, fortunately. Okay, so if you have, okay, so I don't know whether you have any question. You can chat. Okay, so you can chat me up if you have any question, and you can also send chat messages because I would have loved that maybe in your different field you also speak to some concepts and the different ways how they can be measured. So but based on this concept stress that we are talking about, you see that stress, you cannot just take it for granted. That, oh, stress, who doesn't know what stress means? It's because in a study, it could mean a different thing. So, and that is why we need to understand that properly. Also, a concept like collaborative care. I'm trying to go to medical area, health sciences now, to cite example. It may mean different things in different contexts, depending on the study that you are conducting. For instance, while collaborative care may refer to different health professionals doing their own bits of the care services in patients' treatment and care. That is, different health professionals, they are collaborating together, they are joining hands to provide health care. Somebody has a particular ailment, so as the neurologists are coming in, those in internal medicine are also providing their own care, and so on and so forth. So that could mean a collaborative care. All different health professionals are doing their own bit of the care services in patients' treatment and care. On the other hand, it may also mean an effort. It may also mean an effort to integrate particular healthcare services into general healthcare services such that a general practitioner is still able to provide some basic aspect of specialist work without necessarily taking over the specialist job. If, for instance, we have a general practitioner or even a nurse in the hospital who also is able to provide some certain aspect of the doctor's services without necessarily taking up the job of the doctor. So that can also mean a collaborative care. That is, so the sharing of knowledge, not necessarily until when so person come, when the specialist come, at least some basic things about that area of specialty, everybody also knows something about it, so that in case of emergency, they're able to do some basic things while the specialists come in to provide the real professional work. This can also be a collaborative care system. But when you are now conducting a study, the question is, what do you mean by collaborative care? This is a concept that needs clear definition. So, and that is why in any study, you must be able to understand what is this concept, what is the meaning of this concept. And even beyond this, how does it relate to other concepts in that study? The way it relates might be different from between one study and others. And that is why it is very important for every researcher to have mastery of the concepts that you are using in a particular study. A clear understanding of concept will guide clearer formulation of research questions. You see, without understanding your concept and the way it is being measured, the way you want to measure it, you will not be able to formulate clear questions. From our previous example on stress, we can raise the following questions. 1, what learning activities predisposes students to psychological trauma? Can you see? This question now, if you look at this question, you'll see that this question is primarily dealing with psychological stress. So this question is primarily dealing with psychological stress, and that is the major question for the study. The main research question. We can now break these main research questions to sub-questions that will allow us to now measure. But instead of raising this question, if instead we so if the second question is, in what ways does physical activities associated with teaching and learning contribute to strain among students? You will see that the first question is relating to measuring stress in terms of psychological problem. But the second question is, in what ways does physical activities associated with teaching and learning contribute to strain among students? This one is relating to physical stress. So If I'm conducting a study and I'm interested in physical stress, I rather stick to that second question. That is the second question that I'm going to take as my main research question. I can now break this main research question to sub-questions. But if my interest is psychological stress, then I stick to the first question, the learning activities that predispose students to psychological trauma. So I can then raise my sub-questions that will allow me to measure. So, but if I'm interested in the two, then it's better I also put my question in such a way that it will bring together these both physical activities and psychological trauma, so that I will be able to measure appropriately as I ought to measure. These are the ways we need to understand concepts and how it is being measured, so that, okay. So, and now I'm going to give a little space for the attendance. Thank you. Why Dr. Awule take the attendance? You're welcome.
Okay, so everyone, good day. It's time for the first attendance. Like I described, you would see that it's going to be in 3 sessions. So the first time we're going to do it now. Follow that description and then click on submit attendance. So the code for that attendance, I'm going to give it now. Everything is in capital letters. It's SGHXP. S for sugar, SGHXP. X for zeros. So I repeat, SGHXP. Let me see. I will attempt to put it on the screen in red.
Okay.
So it's not there on the screen in red. You will see that everything is in capital letter. So that's the first thing you're going to do the first time. And we're going to do this 3 times in the course of the class. In the next few minutes again, I'm going to come up again to give you the second code. So this is the first attempt. You won't be able to submit until the third one. So if you do 2 out of 3, you have not attended. So you have to ensure that you are there on the 3 occasions to key in the code. So this is the first code. This code is not going to be used for the second one. So a different code is going to be issued which you're going to use for the second attendance as well. So all the 3 would constitute into the attendance for today alone. So that is that. I believe you can see what we have on the screen is SGHXP. This should not be sent to anybody, and don't put it on any Telegram platform. Just use that straight away as it is and don't share. Use it on your system. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Can I delete the? Okay. Okay. So I'll leave this code for the next few minutes before we take it or clean it off. Please, I would like that you can also drop some concepts in your field and the different ways they can be measured. Drop it in the chat box. I can then read it out to everybody. Unfortunately, this platform, you cannot yet communicate, but you can ask your question through the chat box. So, so please, I am waiting for that within the next 1-2 minutes. If you have a concept in your field, different ways these concepts can be measured. So okay. I'm still waiting. Any chat? So anyway, maybe we can also relate with this later on. So when we are talking of concepts, you'll see that concept is very, very important. So it's very, very important for you to be able to do an accurate measurement of what you intend to measure. And like I said, that all researchers make use of concepts, and these concepts guide us on how we do our measurements, and it determines the kind of outcome we have at the end of the day. So following this, my colleague, Professor Aliyu, will come up to discuss conceptual framework with you. Conceptual framework, that is, if you understand your concept, you will then be able to build a framework. That is, understanding your concept, the meaning, and how they are related within a particular study. So please, you can chat me up even on our Telegram page, or you can chat me up, you can private chat me if you have any important questions. If I see that my response to such questions will benefit everybody, then I'll provide the response on the general platform. So otherwise, I will respond privately also. So Dr. Aliyu, so you can take over now. I can clean the erase. So I leave the floor to Dr. Aliyu to discuss the conceptual framework. Thank you. we you are trying to, this is the first to correct some things. So thank you for that. I can see a question here. I want to ask if it's possible for a researcher to be biased while conceptualizing the research. Yes, what we are trying to say about this conceptual skill building is that in using a concept, you have a bias. Okay. So in conducting a study or in relating to a concept, you have a bias which helps you to focus on the measurement, the way you want to measure your variable. And that is what we are saying about this. For instance, looking at the word stress that we talked about the other time, if from the beginning, your interest, your bias is measuring physical stress, then so be it. You need to understand how physical stress is being measured by different researchers in the literature. And once you understand that, you will understand the variables you want to measure with regards to that concept. So that is what we are saying. So bias or being or not being biased in this sense is that you have a focus. You have the way, you have what you have in mind. And it's actually about having a focus and just being careful with that word bias so that people will not misinterpret that can be measured in a wrong way. So, sir, I can't locate the 300. Okay, those ones are asking about the 3 code. They are just keying the code and wait. If once the second code comes, key it in also until you are able to key in the third code. You won't be able to submit. You have to wait for that framework before we close the class for today. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Where
It will not. Is it conceptual? And okay, we continue with.
What I was doing.
Okay.
Continue with that same. Yeah.
Line within the.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So, just to continue from where Professor Ansela stopped, we will be talking about conceptual building on conceptual skill building to build on that. So, we'll be talking about conceptual framework. And in conceptual framework, we should understand what conceptual framework is. And it is basically the set of concepts, assumptions, expectations, and beliefs, which is represented in a diagrammatic form. Well, in a simple term, I'd like to say that conceptual framework it's a diagrammatic representation of your ideas. I mean, you have a beautiful topic, and you realize that we won't conceptualize the same topic same way because we are different humans. So it is the way you are conceiving that topic, the same way that the way you're conceiving that concept will be different. And that's why for those who like follow the conceptual clarification of concepts, clarification of concepts within their literature review, you realize that the way a concept is being explained in context or in particular study will be different from the way in another study. Professor Ansela also well with this. So it helps our conceptual framework, like I said, it's a diagrammatic representation of your ideas, how your concepts are linked together. For example, he gave an example of stress the other time, stress as a concept. And under stress have different constructs. I mean, we have emotional stress, we have physical stress. But again, you realize that stress alone cannot make a study. Definitely, it must be linked to another variable. So you as a researcher, you want to tell your reader, you want to show to your reader the diagram, how you have conceived those concepts and relationship between those concepts and how that translates into the outcome variable or outcome concepts that you have. So that is for conceptual framework. So it's we can say that it's the permutations or links between several variables and how it projects how projection can be made on how their relationship of impact to and their impact to the outcome variable. What are we saying here? We are saying that your conceptual framework will show the links, the link between the variables, the concepts that you have in a diagrammatic form. So although it can sometimes it can be in text form, but basically the common ones that you see all around and that you come across in your literature are the one in form of diagram. We'll get to that and we'll show we'll show samples of conceptual framework. So it represents a clear, unambiguous way of thinking. That the diagram if somebody who has no business with your study should see the diagram, the person should understand your line of thoughts, where you're thinking from, and where that's your thought will end. That is the outcome variable. The person should be able to understand the relationship between and among your concepts and how that translates into your outcome variable. So your conceptual framework will do that for you. It's also provide researcher with the opportunity to define the research importance in terms of what has been studied. I mean, because you cannot have a clear conceptual operationalization if you have not been able to show if you have not to, I mean, if your mental process, if you're not being able to process it in a way that to show how related they are, by the time you're able to put that on paper, by the time you're able to put that in diagram, your research becomes clear to you and the direction of study also becomes clear in a way. So conceptual framework also provide explicit explanation on why the problem relates to as a researcher. You want to how the variable relates to each other. Again, where I keep emphasizing this, it shows relationships in between and among your variables. So again, there's something that looks like a framework that we often confused with conceptual framework is theoretical framework. Now, sometimes people often mistaken conceptual framework for theoretical framework. So I feel it is important here to differentiate what conceptual framework, differentiate between conceptual framework and theoretical framework. For theoretical framework, I would say that from the ontology, theory basically means set ideas or interrelated ideas that are used to explain phenomenon. So coming from that context, theoretical framework, which is theoretical structure, I define theoretical framework as theories of explanation, which should run through the entire process of the research. How do I mean? Now, as you are conceiving that idea, I mean, by idea now, I'm referring to your research question, your research topic. As you're conceiving it, you're conceiving with a mind, I mean, not, you may not be conscious of that, but you have a theory in mind. But you are not conscious of that theory. You have an explanation. Okay, let me put it that way. You have an explanation in mind. That explanation, the way you want to explain your idea, the way you want to explain the problem you have identified, you are good that the problem you have identified, in a way, you are the only one who understood the problem. But in presenting that problem to others, it may be difficult for them to, I mean, be on the same page with you. So your theory of explanation would be the context of the understanding of your reader, right? Readers, as the case may be. So it is important that we differentiate. For conceptual framework, it is that it's like I said, it is a diagrammatic representation of your idea. Why theoretical framework is you have theories that are already been used in previous studies that you may want to adopt, or you may want to adapt some of them. But again, you will agree with me that your research will not be as novel. It's not possible that your research is novel to the extent that no theory, I mean, no single theory or no theory will be able to explain that problem. So it's important that we build our theoretical framework on different theories that have been used in previous studies. So for theoretical framework, we are using theories. I mean, just to explain, we are using theories to explain the problem we are interrogating. Although within the theories of explanation, or within the theory that we're using to explain a problem, we can have several concepts that are related to our own studies. So your conceptual framework helps you, conceptual framework now, helps you to situate and contextualize your study within the space, I mean, within the scope that you are focused on. Why theoretical framework is broad in such a way that it helps, you are using broad theory. You are using theories that are used earlier to explain specific problems you are interrogating. I don't know if that is clear. So for theory, it comprises a generalization that systematically explains the relationship between phenomenon. Within that phenomenon, within that problem you're interrogating, you have several concepts that you want to also show how those concepts are related to then present that problem. So conceptual framework would then help you to explain that, I mean, the relationship between concepts and how they translate into problems. So also, theory is also a set of statements, each of which expresses relationship among concepts. So at this point, you may want to, I mean, you may be confused as to what's the relationship between conceptual framework and theoretical framework. I've been able to differentiate that, and the other slide. So it's fine. So, okay. So it's important for us to have a clear distinction between theories and theoretical framework and conceptual framework. So I start from different dimensions. I mean, the first dimension I'd like to talk about is looking at the basic meaning. What conceptual framework is and what theoretical framework is. If you look at conceptual framework, like I said, it's a diagrammatic representation of your ideas. I mean, how your variables are related together, or how your concepts are related together. But keyword there is it's a diagrammatic representation, it's a representation of your ideas. Why theoretical framework is a structural application of established theory or theories used to explain a phenomenon, used to explain the problem you are interrogating. In terms of meaning, they are clear. Concept framework, diagrammatic representation. For theoretical framework, it's a problem we are interrogating. Conceptual framework map out how variables relate within the context of the study. Like I said, conceptual framework, they show how interrelated or how related our variables are. Then for theoretical framework, they provide explanations and interpretative grounding for the study. Like I said, theories of explanation. I see theoretical framework as your theory of explanation, theories that you are using to anchor the entire research, because that will feed into your methodology. Now, it's not unlikely that you may have one in your study and you don't have the other. And it's not unlikely that you can have both in the study. It depends on your discipline and your field of study. Then in terms of nature, conceptual framework is analytical and context specific. It is specific to your study. You can't use the same, we can't be interrogating different problems and you're using the same conceptual framework. But that is possible under theoretical framework. It's possible that our study in a way may be different, but they fall with, a particular theory we may want to use the same theory to explain the same different topic. So in terms of nature, the explanation under theoretical framework is sometimes may be abstract, but conceptual framework makes it clear, makes the explanation clear by showing diagram of the relationship that we are talking about under our interpretation or under explanation. But in terms of origin, you look at, conceptual framework basically is derived from the literature, empirical findings, policy documents, and research insights. Why theoretical framework is derived from established theories. Is derived from established theories. And in terms of level of abstraction, seeing the diagram of how your concepts are related, you agree with me that the level of abstraction is moderate under conceptual framework, while the level of abstraction is often high under theoretical framework, because most times we feel theories are abstract unless we then contextualize them, unless we then use those theories to explain issues in our society. So also in terms of scope, conceptual framework is narrowed in scope, while theoretical framework is broad and often targets generalization. And for flexibility, which is another dimension, for flexibility, conceptual framework is highly flexible. You can adjust your diagram as you reflect on the topic and as you reflect on the conceptual relationship, you can adjust it. But in terms of flexibility, for theoretical framework is often rigid sometimes, because you don't forget that if you are bringing on board a particular theory, there are set of assumptions that guide the theories. You may not, because the theory is not developed by you. So it may be difficult for you to change those assumptions. The only thing you can do is then to apply those assumptions to the context of your study, to then use those assumptions to explain the problem at hand. So in terms of role in research, conceptual framework guides variable selection. They guide measurement of variables and they guide data analysis. They show the roadmap that you follow in your data collection. They show the roadmap that you follow in terms of talked about concept measurement, and that's what conceptual framework would do for you. But for theoretical framework, it guides problem formulation right from the start. It guides problem formulation, and in on most of our background, we often unconsciously, because it's us the problem and how we are showing it to the world, to then show that this is, and it's often to develop hypotheses, and that in the course of interpretation, yes. All right, sir. So I apologize for that. So the overall objective of theories and framework is to make scientific findings meaningful. Remember that I said in the in using theories and applying theories to our research, we're using theories to explain the problem so that we are able to contextualize that problem and be able to make it clear, and at the end of the make it generalizable. It also helps us to contribute to the existing knowledge. Again, I refer you to, I make reference to literature review. Under literature review, for those who want to do some level of theoretical review, you realize that what we do under that is to review existing theories that have been used in relation to our study, and then be able to pick out 2 or more theories or 1 theory to explain the problem we are interrogating presently. So theories then help you to, and for some will want to also build theory or even refute existing theories. And those are people that are working within the context of grounded theories. So within that, you are trying to build another theory, and which will explain phenomenon in our society. So theory helps us to, doing that, you will be contributing to the body of knowledge by probably refute existing theories or build on existing theories. So why do we need conceptual framework? So to answer the question, conceptual framework, although we may not require, conceptual framework may not be required in every proposal, but it's, for me, I think it's important that we have what I can call a mind map and mental process. For every researcher, you have mental process going on in your head, where, you are trying to show in your head to yourself the relationship between your variables and how your variables are related and how they then produce the outcome variables that you have. So if you are having that, I think it won't be out of place to then have a diagram, may not be in your proposal or may not be even your thesis. But if your department allows that, then why not? It's important that you have that. But you can have it, people stick it on their wall to show how, just to, in a way, to show how their variables are related. So it's important, and conceptual framework is important. There's also, like I said, we often misunderstand and confuse about conceptual framework than any other part of the project. And what that answer is, what is it? And what's the purpose of conceptual framework, and how is its approach? Of course, in terms of what it is, like I said, it is a diagrammatic representation of how your variables, your concepts are related. You'll be the one to draw that. Your supervisor will not do that for you. And it's possible that you have come across different conceptual framework in the course of literature review. But you realize that as you're doing that, you're also thinking that, oh, how are my variables, how are they related? You can put that down, you can pen that down, and so as to show the relationship. That helps you, and it's going to help you build a clear research question or clear specific research question. It's going to help you to do that, because by the time you're not bringing your theory as explanation on board, it becomes seamless for you to. And in terms of people, I think I've been able to explain that while I was explaining the distinction between conceptual framework and theoretical framework, and how its approach is, you approach it the way it is. You should the way you have conceived it, the way you have. Okay, if you are working on stress and how stress translates into academic performance, of course, there will be some mental process in your head. Put it down the way you have seen it. It gets better over and over. As you revise it, it gets better. So you approach it with purpose and with the fact that you are going somewhere. So, but again, I need to reiterate that conceptual framework is often neglected in most of our study. Sometimes we don't, for the reason being that why is it necessary? But again, like I said, as you're thinking, it is necessary, because as you're thinking about your research, you are thinking in terms of conceptual, how you are conceptual, how you are, bringing together your variables and the concept within your variable. So because it's abstract, because of its abstraction, sometimes we may want to neglect it, but it is important. It's then also, because of it's important to recognize and synthesize it, so that it makes our work, it gives direction to our work. Then the third one is the fact that based on existing knowledge of theories, like I said earlier, theories often supply some of the concepts that we use. Depending on what you are working on, your theory can supply some of the concepts that you use in understanding a particular problem. Then, in terms of understanding the details of the problem, conceptual framework is important, though sometimes it can be very tasking. It can be very tasking, and sometimes it can be frustrating. You draw your diagram sometimes, and you're just like, no, this is not showing any relationship, and it's not even giving a clear direction on what I am working. But like I said, theory sometimes can also help us to build a good conceptual framework. Now, failure to conceptualize while planning, because it is important that as you are embarking on that research, you also conceptualize along. If you fail to then conceptualize, then you are, in a way, like people will say, if you fail to plan, of course, there's likelihood of planning to fail. So it is important because your conceptual framework definitely, and then your theoretical framework, like I said, will feed into your methodology session, will determine, because this has to do with epistemology of your work, and it gives clear direction to the kind of research design you are going to adopt, and in terms of the process through which you are going to obtain your data, and the process of your analysis, as well as the interpretation of that data. Because like Professor Ansela said, if you have measured your concept wrongly, you are going to interpret it wrongly. So it is important to conceptualize right from the word go. It is important for you to conceptualize. And the role of, I'm going to speak about the role of conceptual framework in every research. The primary purpose of conceptual framework is to lead to hypotheses that are subject to testing. By hypothesis, of course, we are basically saying that there are set of interrelated variables that we want to measure in our study. We often state null hypothesis. We state and we say we have alternative hypotheses. At the end of the day, if you are not measuring based on the conceptual based on what your conceptual framework is saying, because your conceptual framework is providing roadmap. So within your conceptual framework, you are showing measurement of those concepts. So along the line, you are also trying to, as you're measuring your concept, you are showing a kind of diagram of how you're going to measure the hypothesis. So the major role of conceptual framework is to help us test our hypothesis. So now I go to source materials for the conceptual framework, and basically it's theories. Of course, theories, literature review, and sometimes expert discussions. You have you get hold of your concept and how you are going to measure them you measure them in your research. So again, you ask yourself, which of the theory or theories is or are relevant to this study? Now, some of the concepts measured in those theories can be relevant to your study. Some of them may not be relevant. But again, the assumption of that theory or theories is or are important in explaining your concept. So you mustn't take this for granted. Okay. All right, please. I leave the floor to Professor Aule.
So the last code now for the attendance, if you are there, just take A7V7W. A7V, V for Volvo, 7W. Everything in capital letters. So I'm going to attempt to write it here now. Okay. All right. So I'm sure you can see that. A7V7W. So you can submit now as it is. You only have 5 minutes to do that. Make sure you submit now, here and now. Thank you.
Okay. So, like I said, you ask yourself, what is the relevance of your, which theory is relevant to your study? Of course, this to answer this question, I think if you have gone through a thorough review of literature, and this shouldn't be a problem, because in whatever field you are, you might have come across in the course of reviewing literature several theories that have been used, in relation to the problem you are interrogating. So all you just need to do is then to just make a decision on which of the theories I'm using to anchor this problem or to explain this problem. So that shouldn't be a problem. So then when you have spotted the relevant theory or relevant theories, then you then ask the following question. Then sources, what is the sources of the research problem? Then ask yourself, what is the possible solutions to the problem? Then what are the relevant variables? What variables are relevant to anchor, to direct the, to give direction to the explanation of this problem? Then in what way are these variables related together? So once you're able to do that, then you can then hypothesize. If you want to have hypothesis for your study, you can then develop hypotheses to then show, okay, if A is likely to produce B, that's an hypothesis. So you can then test the hypothesis, since you have good foundation for interrogating the problem. So then sometimes we often say that there is no existing theories that is sufficient to analyze the problem. In that case, and I think I mentioned that the other time, in that case, it's possible that you are going the route of grounded theory, to develop or refine a theory. So simply, it then means that in your literature review, the gap you have identified is the fact that there is no single theory that have been able to explain the problem at hand. Of course, there's no crime if you develop your own theory, but definitely you have to be well skilled in conceptualization to build a good theory and be able to test such theory for its usability. So it's important that we have all this in mind. So construction of conceptual framework. So how do we construct our framework? I asked the question the other time that, okay, how do we start conceptual framework? Again, like I said, as you are conceiving the idea, you also need to you also need to be conscious of the fact that you need to conceptualize. So you need to identify, to start with, you identify relevant concepts. The first approach is, before preparation of conceptual framework, you need to address the following. Of course, you must choose a topic. You must do a thorough literature review. You must isolate your variables. For example, you are working on poverty, inequality, and unemployment. You must, for example, isolate these variables. For example, you have in the topic now, you have poverty, which is a variable. You have inequality, which is another variable. And you have unemployment, which is another variable. So you must be able to isolate all of these variables. By the time you isolate these variables, then you can then generate conceptual framework to then show how related is poverty to inequality. Will poverty produce inequality? And when you are, within inequality, can we then have the outcome variable of unemployment, or can poverty simply translate into unemployment directly? you will now, as a researcher, you now be the one to show direction of relationship and how you want your readers to think, the direction you want your reader to think. Then the second approach is, number one, you need to identify the relevant concepts. Then you need to define those concepts, or you operationalize those concepts. For so, of course, we often operationalize specific terms in our study. So you operationalize those concepts, then you then identify different variables, like the dependent variable, independent variable, as well as if you have intervening variable or moderating variable or mediating variable, then you then need to differentiate all of these and identify them. Then you then need to identify the direction of relationship between and among these variables. Once you have done that, you can then generate the diagram of relationship between your variable. Then the third approach would be that you study the literature properly and how other researchers, other scholars have conceptualized a particular problem that is similar to your own. You then, with that, you do the analysis of previous studies. Then you can then use an adaptable conceptualization to help explain your own problem and the problem you're interrogating. Then you can also reduce the problem to simplest set of conditions. So in a way, as we are conceptualizing, it goes with a lot of assumptions. And that speaks to your theories, which is a set of assumptions that you use to explain a particular phenomenon. So we operate with some set of assumptions. So at the level of conceptualization, your assumptions must be clear. Then you can then identify several theories that will help you explain those concepts. So in a way, what we're doing, it's important note, it is important for us to know that in some cases, some conceptual framework from previous studies can be used depending on the relationship between your study and previous studies. If you feel a particular framework has been used, tested, and it aligns well with your study, you can adopt. There is no crime in that. Then existing framework can be adapted and modified if new variables of interest are identified as important. So, and also as researchers, you must be able to discuss in detail the variables and their relationship as you have presented them in your conceptual framework. Beyond just presenting the diagram, you must be able to explain in text how the direction of relationship between the variables and between the concepts and how they are related. Now, on the screen, I don't know if you are still able to see the screen. You see a sample of conceptual framework showing from social science approach, where you have social economic determinant, and the arrow is pointing to a box with question mark and pointing to mortality. Basically, that diagram is showing, that framework is showing the relation between it's showing the socioeconomic determinant of mortality. Within the biomedical science, from within the medical science, the first box asks nothing, while the second one has environmental contamination, dietary intake, how that translates into disease, infection, and malnutrition, and how it translates into mortality. But you observe something in between the arrow between the question mark and environmental contamination. You have environmental control, which is something that can intervene within that. And between environmental contamination and disease, infection, malnutrition, you have personal preventive measure, which can intervene or mediate between environmental contamination and disease infection. And between disease infection and mortality, you have therapeutic medical technologies, depending on what you are, the kind of therapeutic technologies that the patient is exposed to. So the diagram is basically showing the direction of relationship between variables that the concept that we have and we have in the diagram. This is also an example of another conceptual framework which shows the social determinant, socioeconomic determinant, and how that translates into maternal factors, environmental contamination, nutrient deficiency, injury, and in connection. I mean, you see the line of the arrows as they are related, and taken together, taking maternal factors, environmental contamination, nutrient deficiency, injury, taken together, the 10, I mean, the arrow is pointing towards healthy living or sick. Somebody is likely going to make healthy living, or the person is susceptible to sickness. So, and if you look at the top arrow that comes from socioeconomic determinant down towards the left side, down to personal illness control. Of course, your socioeconomic status would determine individual illness control, individual response to illness. And in a way, the arrow is also pointing to whether the person will be susceptible to sickness or the person will live healthy. So that is another example of conceptual framework. And in terms of defining terms, of course, it is important that we define some of the variables that we have, some of the concepts that we have in our conceptual framework. For example, maternal factor. What are the constructs that we are using? Remember that we mentioned measurement. 1 minute, okay. Remember that we mentioned measurements. It's important for us to show construct that we're going to use to measure our concept. And the example is displayed on the screen. Another example of conceptual framework, another example. So conceptual framework helps us to show the link between our problem statement, the goal, and the outcome variables in a way that, seeing the diagram, I can understand. If I'm not part of your study, I can understand what you're working, the entire thing you're working on. I will be able to, if you have a good conceptual framework, I will be able to understand what you are working on. I stop here. Thank you so much for listening. So if you have any question, please, you can just place it on in the chat box on Telegram. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.